The conference room felt smaller than I remembered. 6 minutes. That's how long it took for Vanessa Wright to dismantle everything I had built over 7 years at Cornerstone Analytics. She slid the termination letter across the polished oak table without meeting my eyes. Effective immediately. No performance review. No warning. Just corporate language wrapped around a knife. My boss, Derek Paulson, stood by the window with his arms crossed, wearing that same smirk he'd worn when I'd questioned his numbers last month. The HR director shuffled papers, avoiding my gaze like I'd already become invisible. My colleagues walked past the glass walls, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. I felt my chest tighten. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, of saving projects from collapse, of sacrificing weekends and family dinners. All of it erased in a 6-minute meeting. Shock gave way to humiliation, then to something colder. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked toward the door. Derek's smirk widened. He thought this was over. He had no idea what he'd just started. The security guard walked 3 steps behind me, close enough to feel like a threat. Every employee I passed turned away. The elevator ride down felt endless. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I counted each floor. 12, 11, 10. My badge no longer worked at the turnstile. The guard had to override it. Outside, the afternoon sun felt harsh and exposing. I stood on the sidewalk, briefcase in hand, watching people rush past. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder about tomorrow's client presentation. I almost laughed. There would be no tomorrow here. I walked to my car, hands steady despite the storm building inside me. Betrayal burned hot in my throat. Every late night I'd spent fixing Derek's mistakes. Every time I'd made him look good in front of executives. Every warning I'd given about the Hastings contract that he'd ignored. The rage was clean and clarifying. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg. I would be patient. And I would be ready. My apartment felt too quiet. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by 7 years of work. Emails, contracts, project files, performance reviews. I read through everything with fresh eyes. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. Derek had been systematically taking credit for my work for 3 years. My risk assessment on the Hastings deal that saved them $2 million appeared in his quarterly report under Executive Leadership Initiatives. My restructuring proposal for the Denver office was now Paulson's Operational Excellence Framework. Even my innovation in client retention strategies had been rebranded as his vision. The unfairness wasn't random. It was calculated. He'd seen me as a threat, not an asset. And when I'd started questioning his inflated revenue projections and the corners he was cutting on compliance, I'd become a liability. They hadn't fired me for poor performance. They'd fired me because I knew too much and wouldn't stay quiet. That realization changed everything. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about arrogance meeting its reckoning. I didn't rage on social media or badmouth Cornerstone to industry contacts. I stayed invisible. But I watched. I monitored their quarterly reports, tracking every decision, every executive move. The SEC filings told stories Derek probably thought nobody would read. Revenue recognition policies that pushed boundaries. Compliance shortcuts that saved money now but built risk for later. The Hastings contract I'd warned about was already showing stress fractures in their footnotes. I cataloged everything. Screenshots, downloaded reports, archived news articles. I built a timeline of decisions and consequences. 6 months after my termination, they announced a major expansion into government contracting. It required regulatory compliance they'd never managed before. I smiled when I read that press release. Derek had no idea how complex those requirements were. I did. I'd spent 2 years studying federal compliance frameworks at my previous firm. They were walking into a minefield, and Derek was too arrogant to see the danger. Greystone Consulting wasn't flashy. They didn't have Cornerstone's glass towers or executive perks. But they had something better, a reputation for fixing what others broke. When Pauline Hendricks offered me a senior analyst position, I almost said no. It felt like a step backward. Then she said, "We specialize in corporate turnarounds and regulatory compliance. We clean up messes before they become disasters." I accepted that afternoon. The work was grueling. I learned forensic accounting, regulatory auditing, crisis management. I studied SEC regulations, compliance frameworks, corporate governance structures. Skills Cornerstone had never valued because they'd never needed them. Until now, they wouldn't. I worked on failing companies, unstable boards, mismanaged contracts. I learned to spot the patterns, the inflated projections, the deferred problems, the leaders who confused confidence with competence. I became good at it. Better than good. Within 2 years, I was leading restructuring projects that saved companies from collapse. My reputation grew quietly in circles Derek Paulson never touched. I was building something he couldn't see coming. By year 4, my name carried weight in corporate turnaround circles. Not celebrity weight, but the kind that mattered: trust. When Greystone sent me to rescue a pharmaceutical company from bankruptcy, I restructured their entire compliance division in 6 months. When a manufacturing firm faced regulatory shutdown, I rebuilt their governance framework and saved 400 jobs. I didn't do interviews or keynote speeches. I just fixed things. Boards started requesting me specifically. CFOs who'd worked with me recommended me to colleagues. I became known as someone who could walk into chaos and create order without drama or grandstanding. The work satisfied something deeper than revenge. I was proving that competence mattered more than politics. That integrity had value. That the people who discarded me had made a catastrophic miscalculation. But I never forgot Cornerstone. I still monitored their reports. Still tracked Derek's decisions. Still waited. Because patience, I'd learned, was just another form of power. And I was very, very patient. The leaked financial document landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. Anonymous sender. Subject line: "Thought you'd want to see this." It was Cornerstone's internal audit report, marked confidential. Someone inside was scared enough to break protocol. I read it twice, then a third time to be sure. The Hastings contract I'd warned about 5 years ago was hemorrhaging money. The government compliance shortcuts Derek had taken were now regulatory violations under investigation. 3 major clients had quietly ended their contracts. Revenue projections for the next quarter were inflated by at least 30%. The company I'd helped build was collapsing under the weight of Derek Paulson's arrogance. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt something colder. Opportunity. I forwarded the document to Pauline with a single line: "Cornerstone Analytics is 6 months from a regulatory crisis. They don't know it yet." Her response came in minutes: "Can you fix it?" I stared at that question. Could I walk back into the building that had humiliated me? Could I face Derek Paulson across a boardroom table? Could I hold his career in my hands the way he'd once held mine? Yes, I could. "Give me 2 weeks, I replied. "I'll need to prepare." The Sentinel Group was a private equity consortium that specialized in distressed asset acquisitions. They'd been watching Cornerstone's decline for months. When Pauline connected me to their senior partner, Calvin Morrison, he cut straight to business. "Cornerstone's board is desperate. They know they're in trouble but won't admit how deep it goes. We're considering a rescue investment, but only if someone can clean up the mess." He paused. "We want you to lead the assessment." I kept my voice neutral. "I used to work there. We know. That's why we want you." He slid a contract across the table. "You know where the bodies are buried. You know who created this disaster. You're uniquely positioned to evaluate whether this company can be saved or should be dismantled." I read the contract carefully. Lead consultant. Full access to financial records, operations, personnel files. Authority to recommend leadership changes. Final say on restructuring proposals. It was everything I needed. "I accept," I said. "But I have conditions." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "Everything I recommend must be based on evidence, not personal history. If I say someone needs to go, it's because the data demands it, not revenge." He smiled. That's exactly why you're the right person. We shook hands. 3 weeks later, I received the official invitation to present my preliminary findings to Cornerstone's board of directors. The building looked exactly the same. Same glass facade, same corporate logo, same revolving doors. But I wasn't the same person who'd been escorted out 5 years ago. I wore a charcoal suit I'd bought specifically for this. My briefcase contained 40 pages of findings that would dismantle careers. I walked through the lobby without checking in. My consultant credentials gave me building access. The security guard who'd escorted me out was gone. The receptionist was new. Nobody recognized me. Good. I took the elevator to the 14th floor, where the executive boardroom waited. My heart beat steady and slow. No anxiety. No anger. Just cold, crystalline focus. Through the glass walls, I saw them gathering. Derek Paulson, older now, with gray touching his temples. Vanessa Wright from HR, looking tired. 3 board members I'd never met. 2 I recognized from my time here. They saw me approaching. Derek's eyes widened, then narrowed. Recognition and confusion fought across his face. Vanessa shifted in her chair, suddenly very interested in her notes. I opened the door. "Good morning," I said. "Thank you for having me. I'm here to discuss Cornerstone's future, or whether it has one." I didn't sit immediately. I stood at the head of the table, opened my briefcase, and distributed copies of my preliminary report. 40 pages, single-spaced, exhaustively researched. Derek stared at his copy like it might explode. I took my seat and waited. Let them read. Let them realize what was coming. The board chair, Douglas Patterson, cleared his throat. "Perhaps you could summarize your findings?" Of course. I opened my laptop. The first slide appeared on the screen. Revenue Recognition Irregularities, 2019 to 2024. Cornerstone has been overstating quarterly revenue by an average of 18% for 5 years. The practices aren't illegal yet, but they violate GAAP standards and will trigger SEC scrutiny within 6 months. Derek's face went red. That's absurd. Your auditors flag it every year in footnotes you ignore. I clicked to the next slide. Here's the correspondence. Silence. Heavy and uncomfortable. I watched them squirm. Watched Derek's confidence crack. Watched Vanessa avoid everyone's eyes. I felt nothing. No satisfaction yet. Just cold, methodical precision. This wasn't about emotion. This was about consequences meeting arrogance. "Shall I continue?" I asked. Douglas nodded slowly. "Please." The next slide was simple. The Hastings contract. Derek's hand tightened on his pen. 5 years ago, I flagged this contract as high risk due to payment terms and compliance requirements. The recommendation was overruled by executive leadership. I looked directly at Derek. "Specifically, by you." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. That contract has cost Cornerstone $4 million in overruns and compliance penalties. It's currently under federal review for reporting violations. The exposure could reach $8 million by year-end. A board member I didn't recognize, Helen Ortega, leaned forward. "How do you know this?" "Because I read the footnotes in your SEC filings. Because I tracked the penalty payments in your cash flow statements. Because I still know how to do the job I was hired to do." The room shifted. Chairs adjusted. Papers rustled. I saw it happening in real time. The power dynamic changing. Derek was no longer the confident executive. He was a man watching his carefully constructed image collapse. I clicked to the next slide. This is a conservative estimate of regulatory exposure across all divisions. The number is $12 million. Minimum. Helen's face went pale. Minimum. If the SEC investigation expands to include revenue recognition practices, that number triples. After the meeting, Derek cornered me in the hallway. His confidence was gone, replaced by something uglier. Desperation. What do you want? His voice was low, urgent. Revenge? Money. To humiliate me. I looked at him calmly. I want Cornerstone to survive, whether you're here to see it or not. You have no idea what you're doing. The board trusts me. I've built this company. You've nearly destroyed it. I kept my voice steady. The Hastings contract alone should have ended your career. But you buried it. Inflated revenue to hide the losses. Cut compliance corners to meet quarterly targets. And when someone tried to stop you, you fired them. His jaw clenched. You have no proof. I pulled out my phone, opened an email, and showed him the screen. It was his message from 5 years ago to Vanessa. Carter is asking too many questions about Hastings. Find a reason to let her go. His face drained of color. How did you CC'd your assistant? She left the company 3 years ago. Before she did, she forwarded me everything. I watched him process this. Watched him realize that the casual cruelty he'd forgotten had been carefully preserved. The board sees this tomorrow, I said. Unless you resign today. He stared at me. You can't do this. Watch me. I didn't release the email. Not yet. I wanted Derek to sweat. Wanted him to understand that the power had shifted completely. I gave the board just enough information to raise questions. Showed them enough evidence to create doubt. Let them start connecting dots on their own. Over the next 2 weeks, I delivered 3 more reports. Each one surgically precise. Each one raising the stakes. The compliance failures weren't just Derek's. Vanessa had signed off on HR practices that violated employment law. The CFO, Bernard Kane, had approved accounting treatments that pushed ethical boundaries. The General Counsel had ignored whistleblower complaints. I documented everything. Not with emotion. Not with accusations. Just facts, timelines, evidence. The board began requesting individual meetings. First with me. Then with Derek. Then with other executives. The questions got sharper. The defenses got weaker. I watched it unfold with clinical detachment. This wasn't revenge. Revenge was emotional, impulsive, satisfying in the moment but empty afterward. This was accountability. This was consequences delivered with patience and precision. This was proving that competence and integrity mattered more than politics and charm. And it was working. The board scheduled an emergency session for the following week. Subject: Leadership Review and Restructuring Recommendations. Derek knew what was coming. So did I. The call came from an SEC investigator named Patricia Delgado. She'd received an anonymous complaint about revenue recognition practices at Cornerstone Analytics. Would I be willing to discuss my findings? I met her in a federal building downtown. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, government-issue furniture. I brought copies of everything. Not the confidential board documents, but the public filings, the SEC reports, the compliance documents that anyone could access with enough patience. I walked her through it. The revenue inflation. The deferred problems. The pattern of decisions that prioritized short-term numbers over long-term stability. She took notes carefully. Asked smart questions. Requested documentation I was legally permitted to provide. How long has this been happening? She asked. At least 5 years. Possibly longer. And previous auditors didn't catch it? They flagged it. Management chose to interpret the rules aggressively rather than conservatively. She closed her notebook. This is helpful. Very helpful. I stood to leave. One more thing, she said. You used to work here. This must be personally satisfying. I considered that. It's not about satisfaction. It's about making sure the same mistakes don't destroy 200 jobs because executives refuse to admit they were wrong. She nodded slowly. That's a good answer. 3 days later, Cornerstone received formal notice of an SEC investigation into revenue recognition practices and compliance violations. The boardroom was packed for the emergency session. All 7 board members present. Derek, Vanessa, Bernard, and 2 other executives lined one wall like students called to the principal's office. I sat at the table with my laptop and a folder 6 inches thick. Douglas Patterson opened the meeting. We've reviewed the consultant reports and the SEC notification. We need to make decisions. Today. He looked at me. What do you recommend? I opened the folder. Full independent audit of all financial statements for the past 5 years. Immediate compliance review of all federal contracts. Leadership assessment by an outside firm. And restructuring of executive accountability frameworks. That could take months, Bernard protested. It will take 4 months minimum. But it's the only way to avoid regulatory shutdown or criminal charges. The room went silent. Vanessa looked sick. Derek stared at the table, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. There's one other recommendation, I said quietly. Immediate leadership changes. Starting with the executive team members who created, approved, or ignored the practices now under investigation. Helen Ortega spoke carefully. You're recommending terminations. I'm recommending accountability. If someone knowingly violated regulations or ignored warnings, they can't remain in leadership. The board will decide who that includes. I didn't look at Derek. Didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who I was talking about. Douglas called for a private session. Board members only. I was asked to wait outside. I sat in the hallway for 90 minutes. Watched executives walk past, faces tight with fear. Watched Vanessa take a phone call, voice shaking. Watched Derek pace near the windows, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his lawyer. I felt calm. Eerily calm. This moment had been 5 years in the making. But it didn't feel like triumph yet. It felt like watching a natural consequence unfold. Like gravity pulling something inevitable into place. The boardroom door opened. Douglas motioned me back inside. The executives were gone. Just the board now. Douglas cleared his throat. We've voted. Derek Paulson is being asked to step down immediately. Vanessa Wright and Bernard Kane will be placed on administrative leave pending the independent investigation. You're being offered the interim chief operating officer position to oversee the restructuring. The room tilted slightly. I steadied myself. I'm a consultant, not an executive. You're the only person who understands what needs to be fixed and has the skills to fix it. We need you. I looked at each board member. Saw desperation, yes, but also trust. They were putting Cornerstone's survival in my hands. I accept, I said. But I'm not here to settle scores. I'm here to save the company. If that means hard decisions about people I used to work with, I'll make them based on evidence, not history. Douglas nodded. That's all we ask. I was now in charge of the company that had fired me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My first action as interim COO was brutal but necessary. I called an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. 200 employees packed in, buzzing with rumors. I walked to the podium. No notes. Just truth. 5 years ago, I was fired from this company without warning or cause. Today, I'm standing here as your interim CO. That should tell you how serious our situation is. Silence. Complete, stunned silence. We have made mistakes. Leadership mistakes. Ethical mistakes. Mistakes that put every job in this building at risk. The board has made changes. More changes are coming. Some of you will lose your jobs. Some of you will be reassigned. It will be painful. But it's necessary. I paused. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I know what this company can be when it's run with integrity instead of arrogance. When decisions are made based on long-term value instead of quarterly bonuses. When people who do good work are protected instead of discarded. I saw faces change. Skepticism shifting to cautious hope. Over the next 4 months, we're going to rebuild Cornerstone's compliance, restructure operations, and restore our reputation. It won't be easy. But it's possible. If you're willing to do the work, I'm willing to lead it. The applause started slowly, then built. Not everyone, but enough. I stepped off the stage and got to work. The hardest conversation was with Derek. He'd been given 2 weeks to clean out his office. I found him there on his last day, packing files into cardboard boxes. He looked older, diminished. Satisfied? He asked without looking up. No. I stepped into the office. This wasn't about satisfaction. It was about stopping you before you destroyed what 200 people built. He laughed bitterly. You're a hero now. The wronged employee who came back to save the day. Must feel good. It feels necessary. I sat down. You had a choice 5 years ago. When I warned you about Hastings, about the compliance risks, about the revenue practices. You could have listened. Instead, you fired me to protect your ego. He finally looked at me. Would you have done differently? Yes. Because I care about the work more than my reputation. You never understood that. I stood to leave. For what it's worth, you were good at parts of this job. Client relationships, strategic vision. But you let arrogance blind you. And when someone tried to help you see clearly, you punished them for it. I walked to the door, then paused. That's not my failure, Derek. It's yours. I left him there, surrounded by boxes and consequences. I felt no triumph. Just tired certainty that justice, delayed, still arrives. 4 months later, Cornerstone Analytics was unrecognizable. The independent audit had been brutal but cleansing. We'd restated 3 years of earnings, paid $2 million in regulatory fines, restructured 5 departments, terminated 12 executives and managers who'd participated in or ignored violations. But we'd survived. More than survived. Our client retention rate hit 87% after we rebuilt trust through transparency. Federal contracts were renewed after we demonstrated compliance overhauls. Revenue was lower but honest. The board offered me the permanent COO position. I accepted on one condition: no more inflated projections, no more compliance shortcuts, no more sacrificing long-term stability for short-term wins. They agreed. I promoted people who'd been overlooked. Engineers who'd done excellent work in Derek's shadow. Analysts who'd raised concerns and been silenced. I built a leadership team based on competence, not politics. One afternoon, I found the termination letter from 5 years ago in an archived file. I read it again. The corporate language. The false courtesy. The casual cruelty of erasing someone's value in 6 minutes. I didn't tear it up or burn it dramatically. I just filed it away. Evidence of what happens when arrogance meets accountability. A reminder of why integrity matters. Why patience has power. Why the long game always wins. Standing in the boardroom where I'd been humiliated, now leading the meeting where we announced Cornerstone's return to profitability, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not vindication. Peace. Douglas Patterson stood to address the board. 5 years ago, this company made a catastrophic mistake. We let political dynamics override good judgment. We lost someone whose competence and integrity could have prevented this crisis. Today, we've regained both. He looked at me. Because of leadership that values evidence over ego, we're not just surviving. We're rebuilding something better. The board voted unanimously to remove the interim from my title. I was now Chief Operating Officer. Permanently. After the meeting, I walked past Derek's old office, now occupied by our new VP of Compliance. I thought about revenge, about justice, about the 5-year journey from humiliation to restoration. The truth was simpler than either. I'd been fired for threatening someone's ego. I'd returned to save something worth saving. The company survived not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to let arrogance destroy good work and good people. I left the building that evening, briefcase in hand, knowing that the best response to betrayal isn't rage. It's patience, preparation, and proving that competence always outlasts politics. They thought they'd ended my story. They'd only written the introduction.